Hi, I'm Diane.
And I'm John, and you're listening to Paranoid Fantasy. Today we're podcasting from the car because we're on the go. So if you hear a train or a bus in the background, just know we are in a car.
We're Parkside.
Exactly. And today we're talking about the crazy story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard.
2103 West Volunteer Way, Springfield, Missouri.
Gypsy Rose was born and seemed to be experiencing a lot of physical ailments. Although she met all her childhood milestones, her mother took her to the doctor often, the poor family, because she was just sick so much.
So was she really, really sick, or was this something the mother was just painting upon the child?
Well, it appeared that the child was sick, and she would go down onto the floor, and the mother reported that she had seizures. Although nobody actually ever saw her shaking and convulsing, there are all kinds of seizures, petit mal, some of them you can't hardly detect. But her mother insisted that her vision became disturbed for like 2 days after the event.
So Dee Dee was the mother. Mm-hmm. The father's name was Rod. Was he still in the picture?
It seems like
they got
Dee Dee,
separated.
Yeah, they did, but he was still really interested in being a part of that family and supporting, especially little Gypsy, because of her problems. So he really wanted to be closer. He always paid his child support, but Dee Dee sort of kept him at arm's length, and then they kept moving away from where he was, and he stated that he was afraid that if he pressed it too much that she would cut him off completely, although it didn't seem like they had domestic violence or anything going on in the house, and he seemed genuinely sad, and he seemed like a really tender person. So that was when I first started wondering, why is he so worried that she's just going to cut him off? He's the father of the child. It made me wonder if the mother was really not as sweet as she appeared.
Well, it seemed like Dee Dee was born like Gypsy was born like a totally normal, healthy baby. But then these signs started, presenting themselves according to Dee Dee, and eventually, after Dee Dee basically self-diagnosed her with leukemia, multiple sclerosis, and multiple learning disabilities, Gypsy ended up in a wheelchair.
Yeah, Dee Dee claimed that she couldn't talk anymore. I saw that too. And the thing was, she would take her in for these tests, and so this poor little girl was getting constantly poked and prodded and examined, and needles put into her. She lost a lot of weight, and so Dee Dee asked that a feeding tube be installed. And the caretakers that she took her to, of course they did it because the poor girl seemed to be starving.
She also had her lymph nodes removed. She was on countless medications, and she also lost many of her teeth. The mother actually shaved her head so that she would appear more like a.
She said she had She told the little girl she had cancer.
So throughout all this, this wasn't just something that they were keeping to themselves, but they were actually putting themselves out in the public and becoming part of many charities where they were receiving trips. The mother and daughter, Gypsy and Dee Dee, were receiving trips to Disneyland, to Disney World, and they even had a house built for them with a special ramp by Habitat for Humanity. And the trips were paid for mostly, I think, by Make-A-Wish Foundation.
Yeah, that's amazing how many people came to their aid. Their neighborhood association, I think churches also did GoFundMe for her, and every time Dee Dee was like, seems so thankful and so wonderful, and the little girl Gypsy, she talked like a little girl, but I think the mother encouraged her to keep that little girl voice.
Yeah, she had a little baby doll voice. Now the fun part of this, which is twisted, or the funny part is, there's so many pictures of little Gypsy dressed up in these character outfits, whether it's Star Wars or Disney characters, because when they would go on these trips to, made for, very sick children, that they could go and have some experience that was special to them, because, everyone understood that they were really sick or that they were going to have like a shorter life. So they're taking them to Disney World, and she was always dressing up as the characters from the movie or the theme park that they were visiting.
Yeah, they spared no expense, that's for sure. From the pictures, it looked like she was constantly, decked to the nines. And I think I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that as Gypsy got older, like she started having more feelings for boys in her age, but at the same time the mother was changing the birth certificate 5 years back, because as Gypsy got older, she sort of realized, I think, that when she turned 18 that she would lose that parental control over her daughter. So when she was, I think,
15.
the mother changed the birth certificate to show that she was 10.
It was kind of amazing, and she said, "Oh, you're too young for boys," because when she thought she was 15 years old at that point, and she actually probably was 19. So,
well, and just around when she was 13, I guess they were living in around the New Orleans area. That's when Hurricane Katrina hit. So they were actually relocated to Missouri, and conveniently enough, the mother was able to introduce her to many other medical treatments and surgeries that she didn't need, because when she would take her to the doctor, she said basically that the storm had taken over her medical records and they were lost.
that gave her pretty free rein to report basically anything she wanted. So here are people, once again, they're trying to help this family, and they're doing the very best that they can to help them and take them at their word. And that's a lot of money that was given out, a lot of medical treatment, a lot of everything. They went to a Star Wars convention, which is awesome. But she met a man who was 35 years old, and they sort of struck up a romance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they ended up going to the movies. Wait, no, they didn't. That was a different one. I'm skipping ahead a little bit.
You're getting to the good part, because the mother put her foot down with the 35-year-old, forbade her from using the computer, and so Gypsy, the 15-year-old, 19-year-old, got a separate account on her phone, and struck up a friendship with a young man who became very much infatuated with her.
Yeah, well, as I understood it, and I know there's different versions of the story, but originally she met this man on some type of like dating site, and the mother found out, so the mother actually destroyed Gypsy's computer. So then the daughter started logging into her mother's computer after she went to sleep. And
okay.
yeah, and then eventually the mother caught on and locked her own computer. So Gypsy was forced to do all her online dating on her phone.
So that they'd already kind of exchanged numbers, and then that's how she was able to continue this relationship. She kind of closed the door after the horse had run out, because they'd already made contact. They'd already sort of struck up a romance. The boy had a couple of developmental diagnoses, which the characteristics of those diagnoses made it so that he would be pretty single-minded in things, that he wouldn't, cross-reference things, or he pretty much became infatuated with her, locked onto her, and he really wasn't thinking things through much at all.
And was this the same boy that went to the movies with them?
Yeah, they devised a plan. She wanted him to come to the town, and
they didn't want to look like they had met online. They wanted to stage this meeting in front of the mother, so that Dee Dee, the mother, would just think Gypsy met this kid in public, and that she was there when it happened, and they just struck up a friendship, so that the mother wouldn't realize that her daughter was getting romantically involved, because she wasn't allowed to have boyfriends, but she was allowed to have friends, according to Gypsy's friend Aaliyah.
And here's the part that kind of sent a chill up my spine. They'd set up this so-called meeting at a movie, and he was going to be coming in after Gypsy and her mother were seated, and he was going to sit next to Gypsy. And when he did that, and they started talking a little bit.
The mother actually said, "Hey, this guy's pretty creepy. Let's move over a little bit."
Yeah, so she had that foreboding.
And the mother moved down, a couple seats, but Gypsy stayed in a seat next to
Nick.
Okay, so Nick and Gigi, Nick and Gypsy and Dee Dee are in this movie theater, and so suddenly Nick has to go up and use the bathroom. So
She follows him out, Gypsy.
right, they ended up going into the bathroom of the movie theater.
Yeah. She decided they were gonna, do
Consummate
that.
relationship,
Yes,
yeah.
and so that's what they did.
And then I guess they must have been in there for a minute because Dee Dee came out and according to Gypsy's own words, Gypsy and Nick had made it to the lobby just in time in front of the snack bar so that
So to speak.
Dee Dee didn't have to find them in the bathroom. Anyways, so let's just stop right there on part 2 of this podcast. We'll find out where the story goes. So, let's fast forward. We're talking about the infamous story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her mother Dee Dee. So, they're living in Springfield, Missouri. The year is 2015. Gypsy's around 19 years old at this time, but in her head, according to her mother, she still thinks she's 15.
Yes, that's right. And her boyfriend has come to town, and he's staying at a Days Inn at the edge of town.
People haven't seen Dee Dee around. They're kind of used to seeing Gypsy and Dee Dee run around town as the, poster child for all these illnesses and, raising money. And this is the golden child that keeps surviving all of these horrible, health incidents. So nobody's seen Gypsy and no one's seen Dee Dee, but something pops up on their joint Facebook account. And what is that post?
It said, the bitch is dead.
So neighbors and friends are looking at that and they're thinking, wow, well, Gypsy and Dee Dee's account must have been hacked.
Yeah, it went on to say, too, that I killed her and I raped her sweet daughter.
There's a friend of the family, his name is Dave. He gets kind of concerned, so eventually he calls the police. The police go over. There's no signs of forced entry, and actually there's a window that's unlocked, so the police can't necessarily legally just go into that house and look around. So what happens?
Well, Dave notices that there's a window that's not locked, and it's not breaking and entering if you enter through something that's not locked. So he went ahead and did that, walked through the house, came out and reported that no one was there, but Gypsy's wheelchairs were there. She had 3 of them. They were all there. Her medication was there. And so people were very concerned.
Right, and that is interesting. I didn't put that together, but, I mean, according to the world at large, I mean, Gypsy needs a wheelchair to get everywhere. And that's where this case gets a little bit interesting later. So eventually, the news turns out to be a little different than what Dave discovered, because the police make a statement that Dee Dee was found face down in her bedroom. She had been stabbed multiple times and she was dead.
Dave was interviewed and said, I can't believe that I missed that. And so that raised a little suspicion toward him. But later, it turns out he basically was just looking for the little girl. And he didn't go into Dee Dee's room because when the girl was not in her room and wasn't there and nobody answered when he tapped on the door, he didn't go in there and search the mother's room.
Right, so it's obvious that the mother is dead and no one can find Gypsy. Well, they do end up finding Gypsy because she had sort of this electronic trail online of her chats. They find a friend of hers, Aaliyah, who she had been texting with, and actually starting to reveal the secrets that she had, that she doesn't really feel comfortable around her mother, that her mother is too protective, to say the least, and things end up circling back towards this young man, Nick.
Yeah, the interest they checked the URL from the menacing Facebook messages and found that it hadn't been hacked. And when they traced it back, it was Nick's computer that sent those messages, and it took him right back to his house.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a dead giveaway that, okay, here's this boy, and he made these statements. So when they went to talk to him and interview him, lo and behold, there was Gypsy.
Right. So they find Gypsy with this boy. They take him in both for questioning, and it's pretty obvious from the get-go that they've both been involved with the murdering of Dee Dee Blanchard.
They seized his computer to see if that was like a pattern of his to threaten people, and they found that there had been a bunch of research done about how to kill somebody.
The murder weapon was actually a knife, and they actually mailed the knife from the mother's town back to Nick's home, so that arrived in the mail later. So that, it's pretty interesting because people actually all around just were shocked that this little girl who they had just championed for so long was actually a victim who became part of the perpetrator. And then Gypsy later said in an interview that she never thought anybody would find out that she and that boy had done this, like that they really thought that they would get away with it.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times whenever there's a murder like this, the first thing that goes through my head is, why wouldn't you just run away? Why wouldn't you just get away? Right,
and a lot of people thought that, but it turns out that the mother apparently had some condition called Munchausen.
That's hard to say. I know, Munchausen?
Munchausen by proxy.
And here's another little
Munchausen syndrome.
Munchausen. That's right. That's how you say it. Say that again.
Munchausen by proxy, and this is just it's a recognized case where a parent, usually a mother, will continue to poison or keep their child sick so that they remain this vital to their child's life. They get a lot of attention, and they basically just keep sabotaging their children and faking these illnesses and sicknesses so that the child stays home and is in the hospital a lot. And there was one doctor that said in particular that this was actually one of the worst cases he had seen, because not only were they faking all these illnesses, but they were profiting off of the charity organizations and actually receiving so much money. Miranda Lambert, the country singer, actually paid a visit to Gypsy in the hospital and wrote the family a check for $3,500 cash. So they were really, I would say Dee Dee was really taking advantage of this. Now, I have a different thought on what ends up happening to Gypsy, but if you'll tell us basically what happened to Gypsy and Nick once they were arraigned and processed.
Well, they looked at Gypsy's phone, and she had recorded when they'd left the mother's home, left her dead body on the bed, soaked in blood. And
there was a video?
On Gypsy's phone,
Mm-hmm.
when the two got back to the Days Inn where Nick was staying. He had taken a bus into town. They were going to sleep there the night and then take a bus back to his home. And she taped them in that hotel room, and she appeared giddy. They were both very happy and excited, and they actually had a romantic interlude, which she captured much of that on film.
Mm-hmm.
Her defense to that was that she was so upset by that situation that had just happened back at the house that she had taken some pills to help her to get through that night.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty damning evidence, though, that she was perhaps a cold-blooded killer.
Right, and there's two ways to look at this, because at the beginning, when this first came out, I mean, it's really easy to put someone on trial, say you killed your mother, you got to do the time, you're a threat to society. But when you really look at it, this young girl had been tortured like her entire
Yeah.
life. Like her mother was actually subjecting her to, I mean, just alone getting a feeding tube installed into you when you don't need that, having your teeth fall out from the medicine you're taking, being forced to sit in a wheelchair when you can walk. I mean, that is 15 years of absolute torture. And when she came out of this, I mean, she was very, very skinny and just looked really sick. And she actually had this baby doll voice that apparently the mother, coached her to have this real sad victim baby doll voice that would sort of appeal to people's heartstrings. This is just a sample of her arraignment in court. This is Gypsy Rose talking.
2103 West Volunteer Way, Springfield, Missouri.
So that's a 19-year-old girl speaking to the judge.
Yeah. And that's not the way she sounded on the phone tapes at the at the hotel or anything. I mean, her voice actually was different. But here's the thing, and it's like I really think that Gypsy did not think she could just run away from her mother, because you have to remember that here's a little girl, and like you said, I wonder how many needles were stuck into that little girl's body just for blood tests, just for
needles,
testing,
surgeries, and she's going through this Munchausen syndrome, and apparently when you are, well, not only is it that you've been almost like kidnapped by your own family, but this is her mother. This is all she knows. So she's the victim oftentimes just becomes complacent, and
that's a good point.
It's normal. I mean, it's normal for them. They don't see this as, it's not like they had a normal life and then something changed. Like, she grew up from the day she was born with her mother, manipulating her and telling her, you're sick, you're sick, you're sick.
And not only manipulating her, but manipulating doctors, people in authority, everyone in the town, the pastor at the church, stars, foundations.
Right.
So she saw her mother as pretty much invincible.
And then, of course, when she starts meeting this guy online and talking to other friends and realizing, wow, like maybe this isn't true. Like, she eventually realized, like, she could walk. We don't know if she was walking around at home when people weren't looking, but we can imagine to, because when she was arraigned in 2015, she actually walked into the courtroom, and all of her family and friends were pretty much shocked. I mean, that was like a big moment of a lot of the transcripts and the documentaries we saw, were that people were just so shocked that Gypsy could walk.
Yeah, I felt sorry for Alia, because she was totally shocked, and she had really been sticking up for Gypsy.
Investing and
she loved it. She was her friend.
So it turns out, where is Gypsy now? So Gypsy actually got 10 years time, and she wasn't convicted of murder because she actually hid in the bathroom and covered her ears while Nick had gone into the bedroom and was killing Dee Dee. Dee Dee was apparently screaming for Gypsy's help, and, Gypsy just ignored it. So it's really hard because, I mean, this all happened under very extreme circumstances, and it's really hard to know, like, what someone's going through. It's easy to place a judgment and say, oh, this girl, was a cold-blooded killer. But, I mean, if there's any excuse where you excuse, like, murder out of, self-defense, I mean, I think this is a good case for that.
Yeah, I don't think she could have escaped her mother, and, I mean, I don't think that, I think her mother would have found her at any cost. And this young man, I feel really sorry for him, because he's awaiting trial, and he's going to get he's going to trial for first-degree murder.
Well, I don't feel so bad for him, because honestly, I just feel like, okay, there's many other ways he could help Gypsy without killing her mother.
Yeah, I agree, but this boy was mentally challenged, so we're not talking about someone who has all their faculties, and plus, she tapped into his problems. He had this fantasy that he was had multiple personalities that were very, very marked, and he had names for each one of them. And she tapped in. There was one that was particularly violent, he told her, and so she said, well, I'm going to have multiple personalities too. So she would choose a personality to match his different personalities. And so she would use this one that she called Ruby, and that Ruby was her match to his violent character. So
Called Victor.
Victor, that's right. And so she really did feed that and encourage that, and he was locked onto her. She had had sex with him, and was feeding these neuroses that he had, and I don't know if he was really in charge of his faculties when that happened, and I think that's why they're taking a while to try him, because they want to analyze and find out, did he really make that decision to do that?
Yeah. Well, if we look forward, it turned out, according to Dee Dee's family, Dee Dee was the last of 6 children, and her mother apparently used a lot of the same techniques on Dee Dee that Dee Dee used on Gypsy, which was maybe similar to the Munchausen by proxy. So Dee Dee's mother really grew up with her and made her the favorite. She was buying her cars and giving her cash money, while Dee Dee's sisters and brothers really kind of were like left out of that love that the mother gave. Although the mother was also, leading everyone to believe that Dee Dee was born with this heart murmur, and that she really couldn't, do much activity at all. So she grew up sheltered, to say the least, and maybe manipulated by her own mother.
I think the saddest thing was when the doctor that had first discussed that she had this syndrome,
he didn't report it.
He didn't report it
to Child Protective Services.
No, he did. He ran a bunch of tests on her, and he was very thorough. And
that Gypsy could walk.
Yeah, he came out all elated that, wow, let's let her take a few steps here, and let's just see how things go. And she took Gypsy out of the office, and
pretty much Dee Dee, if the doctor wouldn't give the treatment that she was recommending, then she would just find a new doctor. And so Gypsy apparently had hundreds of doctors, or over 100 doctors that she saw in her life. And to go even further, I mean, Dee Dee was actually a professional nurse before all of this, situation started with her daughter, and going around for the charities.
That would give her the wherewithal.
She had a background as a nurse, so she knew a lot about the symptoms to describe when they would go to these doctor's appointments.
That's just horrific. What a nightmare.
It's a tragic story. We just hope the best for, all those involved, and hopefully, Gypsy will be able to get out. I mean, her voice already sounds less affected when she's doing interviews, and she seems like a really smart girl, but it is just so surreal when you're looking at this girl for so many years that just looks like this broken, sad, very, very sick little person, and then the whole time that she was just sort of like a regular kid.
Yeah, she could have been out and had a normal life.
And so that's pretty much it for today. I think next podcast we're going to go on to something a little bit lighter. I'd love to talk about the Herbalife.
Oh yeah.
Pyramid schemes. What's your idea?
I think that's a great idea. I'm up for researching that.
Well, this is John.
And I'm Diane.
And you're listening to Paranoid Fantasy.